people on the line. We actually had 60 people register for this webinar, so we've got a good group, so we're looking forward to a lively discussion towards the end. If you've just joined us, I'll ask that you press *2 to mute your line, and we'll go ahead and jump into things right now. So thanks. As you know, you've registered for this webinar. It's called Measuring Co-operative Impact Methodologies for Capturing the Economic, Social, and Environmental Impact of Co-ops. And our featured speakers today are Fiona Duguid from the Canadian Co-operative Association and George Karaphillis from Cape Breton University. If you just joined us, please press *2 to mute your line, and we'll prompt you to unmute at the end for the discussion. Thank you. So basically what we have here today is a really interesting discussion that we've been looking forward to for a long time. Fiona will be able to provide a bit more detail in terms of what we're going to be presenting today. But certainly you'll hear about some various methodologies, and you'll hear in depth about one in particular that George will present. We'd like to acknowledge that Nicoletta Uzia, who has been one of our key researchers on gathering these different models for impact, she's had a family matter that she's had to attend to, so we graciously thank Fiona Duguid, who's agreed to present her portion of the program today. And if people have in-detail questions about the different models that are being presented, we'll make sure to connect you with Nicoletta after the webinar as well. So we'll ask that you be kind and generous with Fiona in asking her detailed questions about the economic models. But I think that we've got lots of other folks with lots of wisdom on the line, and so we look forward to the discussion where you bring forward your ideas about different models as well. So I'll just start by giving you a little bit of background on the network and who it is that is hosting this webinar series. So we're across the whole country. We've got a network of over 100 researchers that are involved in measuring various aspects of the cooperative difference. And so we know that that's a very loaded statement, and so we've been trying to unpack that and give a bit of detail and be able to tell people confidently what it is that means. So that's what we've been researching as a network, and we have about 15 active projects right now that are pursuing that. So we've been funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Our funding began in 2010 and will run until 2015. So over the next couple of years, we'll be getting a lot more of our research results, and our events will be holding a couple of conferences. One in particular I'd like to mention is we're looking to organize a tools conference on co-op tools. And so there are a lot of really interesting metrics that have started to be captured, and we want to bring a conference together so that we can have a dialogue about the various tools and how they can be used. If you have any ideas for future webinars, or you have some research that you would like to share, we'd certainly like to invite your participation, and you can contact us through our website, cooperativedifference.coop. So we do host 6 free webinars each year. And we have another one coming up later this month, actually, on April 25th at 1 o'clock Eastern. We've got a webinar on the ICA principles in large co-ops. And our subtitle we sort of like because it hopefully will bring people who want to discuss. We're saying just for show or integral to success. So we've got a number of folks who are sort of on both sides of the coin in terms of challenging whether large co-ops can actually employ the ICA principles in terms of participation of their membership and that sort of thing. And we've got a great lineup of speakers, so please do mark that in your calendars. You can register. If you don't want to copy down that registration link, you can go to cooperativedifference.coop, and on the main page you will see an opportunity to register from there. So my last piece is being able to introduce our 2 wonderful speakers today, and then I'll pass it over to Fiona. So many of you are probably familiar with Fiona Duguid. You may remember her involvement with the Co-op and Rural Secretariat with the Government of Canada, and we've been blessed to have her working with us as our research officer here at the Canadian Co-operative Association since August of 2012. So Fiona has played a really large part with the Measuring the Co-op Difference Research Network. She's working with a number of our projects, and we're really pleased to have her involved. And she's been coordinating the national cluster of our network for a couple of years, even before she started with CCA. She's been involved in the co-op movement for over 15 years, and prior to joining CCA, she was a senior policy and research analyst with the Cooperative Secretariat. Her master's thesis looked at emerging cooperatives in Vancouver and the 5th principle, focused on education. She completed her doctorate at the University of Toronto, where her research focused on green energy co-ops in Ontario and members learning about sustainable energy development. She's a founding member of the WindShare Co-operative and was also part of the Toronto Renewable Energy Cooperative Education Committee. She currently serves on the board of the Canadian Association for Studies in Cooperation and has been doing so since 2010, and she's currently our program chair for the 2013 conference coming up in Victoria starting on June 4th. And to introduce you to George Karaphillis, he's currently the director of the MBA in Community Economic Development program at Cape Breton University. So he's the director of the Community Economic Development Institute and also an associate professor of management science. He's been teaching at Cape Breton University for many years, including courses on finance, investment management, quantitative methods, information systems, and entrepreneurship. He has interests in valuation research and also impact analysis, which is what he'll be speaking to mostly today. So I want to thank both Fiona and George for joining us and pass it over to Fiona for the next portion of the webinar.
Hello and welcome everyone for spending the next hour with us. I'm going to start off by introducing the National Study on the Impact of Co-ops. You can see on the slide some of the stakeholders that have been involved in this. Well, not only is it a goal of the research network for the CURA, but it also has been something that many folks from all these different stakeholder bodies have been talking about the need for some time. So hopefully the study that we've embarked on will begin to provide some deeper evidence around the impact of co-ops. Sorry. So some accomplishments so far. We started really rolling this out in the middle of 2012. We began by establishing an advisory committee, some of which I'm very thankful for some of you on the line who are sitting on that advisory committee. As you can see, these are researchers from various backgrounds and different cooperative associations from across Canada. And our aim is to really design this research. Everything from scope, economic, social, and environmental, seems very often obvious to us on the bottom line. But of course, there are some technicalities around that. So, and some of that deals with the methodologies, of which I'm going to speak about shortly, as well as the methods, issues of data, and what is already collected and what should be collected, as well as thinking about a GIS option and how we can relate that to the geography of Canada and link it directly to being able to make maps and directly relate it to the census data. And then, of course, implementation. So who is going to do this and when and how, and all of those logistical items. The second task that we have been working on, and this is one of the reasons why we're so happy to have George on the line today, he has done a pilot project in Nova Scotia in 2012 where he actually did conduct an economic impact study. And so hopefully he's going to be able to share with us today a number of his lessons learned as well as some data that he actually collected from that study. And then thirdly, we hired Nicoletta to work on a methodologies paper. And she is a postdoc at the Ivy Business School in Western and has a degree in economics. And she has been a tremendous value to this project. And now I'm actually going to move into a discussion about the paper that she has written. And as Aaron said, I'm sort of pinch hitting for Nicoletta, who is away, but I will try to do some justice to her paper. So why did we decide to do a methodologies paper? As you can see, and as we all know, the true value of co-ops to their members and community and the Canadian economy is actually quite little, it's little understood. We know co-ops are complex structures, and so we set out to find and then compare different types of methodologies that could best help us to understand the impact of co-ops. As I said before, we want to capture this complexity by looking at the economic, social, and environmental impacts. And so this is sort of a review or survey work of all the different types of methodologies out there around economic, social, and environmental impacts. And perhaps, I say that, dot, 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 because we are hoping that perhaps we can come up with a way of developing a standardized co-op impact methodology. And again, a bit of learning on the go here, but at the same time, hopefully by doing a good review of the work of the methodology work that's already out there, we can step forward with a really good foundation. Okay, so the paper that Nicoletta has written has 3 goals. One is the critical analysis, including the advantages, disadvantages, and best use of common methodologies to measure economic impact. And this is just really where she has excelled being an economist. And then we also asked her to look at the social and environmental impact methodologies, including the challenges, again, and also some advantages and limitations. And then also to take that information and start to highlight some of the operational challenges that could arise in conducting a national impact study. So that's what I'm going to talk about here today. I know this is fairly text-dense, but hopefully the folks sitting at their computers can take a look at this. Nicoletta has been able to outline for us 4 different, sort of the top 4 different ways of measuring economic impact. Especially the ones that she sees as most appropriate for our project.
I think we've got someone on the line who could press *2 to mute. We're just hearing some shuffling of papers. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So while you're taking a look at that, I'm going to highlight some of the methodological challenges in doing any one of these, although of course there's some pros and cons for each individual one. So the big one, of course, is that economic impact only measures the economic impact and thus doesn't capture the unique value of co-ops. And so that's why we've also looking at the social and environmental. Nicoletta's also highlighted the countervailing market power issue. So this is measuring the pro-competitive effect of cooperatives, involves measuring the influence they have on member returns. So for example, the additional revenue or savings that they receive from cooperative membership. So this involves in estimating the prices members would have paid or received in the absence of the co-op. Another challenge to highlight is the missing goods and services. So this is around the goods and services that co-ops provide that otherwise would go missing in their local communities. So for example, research analyzing the local economic impact of co-ops needs to establish whether existing co-ops were created in reaction to either a company leaving or the community, or a community need that was not being met by other businesses. A fourth challenge in using one of these economic impact methods here is identifying the livable wages. So co-ops often provide superior working conditions and livable wages and a variety of benefits for members or employees. And this can often set the standard in industry, but how do we measure that? It can also provide examples for good labor and management relationships, a good job ladder opportunities, and excellent opportunities for skill development and capacity building, but none of these approaches help to capture that. A fifth challenge is around local economic stability. And as we know, co-ops tend to be anchored in their regions or their communities, and their members are where their members are located, and therefore it is less likely to relocate. And they also play a role in attracting and retaining additional economic activity. So they can play an important role, and it's difficult to measure, yet this is one of the most important economic impacts that co-ops have in especially rural Canada. And then finally, a direct impact of co-ops is at the corporate level versus member and individual or firm level. So it's difficult to measure the extra cooperative value that accrues to the community or stakeholders or non-members and the general public, such as tax payments or employment opportunities. It also generates intra-cooperative value, and that is typically captured primarily by members, such as the improved profitability, valued member services, patronage dividends, or improved prices for products. So while I haven't gone into detail about these specific methodologies, Nicoletta has nicely highlighted the pros and the cons and what it's usually best for. But you can also see that there's some overarching challenges that we need to address when we implement any one of these methodologies. So to move to methodologies that measure social and environmental impact, and as I highlighted earlier on, this is an incredibly important part of co-ops, and especially when we want to think about the triple bottom line. And this is also where social accounting has really been able to make its mark. So Nicoletta has highlighted three different impact methodologies, again using some pros and cons to each of these. And I'm going to highlight some of the, again, overall methodological challenges to implementing any one of these. So, of course, choosing a methodology that best suits our purposes as a national study is a huge methodological challenge. Often organization or co-op specific regarding the indicators collected or reported or measured. So this means that each co-op could be doing and collecting and reporting on different types of indicators, some of which may be useful in one of these different methods, but not necessarily standardized across the board. A fourth challenge is around difficult to talk about impact across one co-op sector, let alone across all of co-ops. So aggregating it across all the way across the nation in terms of all co-ops doesn't necessarily capture all of the work that is being done even within one sector or one co-op. And then another, I think, a really large challenge that we have to address when implementing any methodology is around awareness of social impact or environmental impact by the co-ops themselves. This would include co-ops, whether they collect or report, let alone evaluate themselves based on any of the indicators that could be found within any of these methodologies. And then, if once we pick a methodology, having buy-in from the individual co-ops to support the collection of the indicators within these is a huge challenge. So to turn to some overarching comments around the whole study that Nicoletta has been able to highlight for us, and some of the challenges. Enumerating, so we'll talk about the first one, enumerating the co-op population. So, what is the end of co-ops in Canada, with the total number of co-ops in Canada? And that while it may be simple enough, but is also hard to tackle, especially when when we are not sure about what's happening with the database that's run by the federal government. It has been transferred to industry, and hopefully we will be able to use it and continue to use it. The second one is around identifying co-ops. So this seems a little bit funny, but on the other hand, what is exact criteria for identifying a co-op business? So do we merely take it on incorporation and who is incorporated into co-op? Does that include mutual or not? So that is an important criteria to be able to hammer down. The third one is around the unit of analysis. So are we talking about by sector? So again, we mentioned this earlier on, but challenges create an aggregation bias. So since co-ops from different sectors have different product mixes and different types of technology and different behavior. And then what is the region of study? So we need to decide on whether all co-ops in a given area or only those incorporated in that area. And so, for example, this is where the head office is an issue, and then also where the province of the co-op is incorporated in. And I think that George is going to maybe highlight a little bit of how he handled this in his study. And the time scale is, again, a tricky one because do we take it on how long before incorporation? Do we talk about the impact? Or how long after demutualization? Do we measure the impact? It sounds a bit silly, but on the other hand, co-ops do have long-term effects in communities, and whether it's demutualized or if it has a long startup period, it can have quite a big impact as well. And then finally, what is counterfactual? So would the output co-ops be provided by other businesses? So for example, such as products or services or employment. And so what this really speaks to is not overstating the co-op impact and assuming that just because the co-op is there that another business wouldn't have stepped in and provided that service or that good. So to conclude, no clear champion in terms of economic, although definitely the input-output model with tweaks, and again, hopefully this is the model that George used in Nova Scotia, and he'll be able to speak a little bit to some of those tweaks that he was able to do in order to make it just that much more meaningful, to try to lessen some of those cons in that table. And then secondly, around the social and environmental, really, in lots of ways, this will be determined by the reporting challenges that we are up against around what co-ops already do report or what they are willing to report, so that then we can use those indicators in order to then implement one of the different models. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to George, who is now going to drill down as a person who has conducted an impact study. And we'll be able to speak to some of these challenges as well as to some of the findings that he found in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for attending this webinar. And I'll go quickly into my study. So talking about scope, that's the first item. Basically, the project I did, it was in preparation for the conference to celebrate the Year of the Cooperatives in Nova Scotia, which happened in November. And basically, this is a summary of the presentation I made at that conference. So the scope was the province of Nova Scotia. That's what the idea was. And so we're doing it for the general cooperatives and for the financial cooperatives. And the financial cooperatives meaning the credit unions and the insurance corps, which is primarily the cooperators. So just to give you an idea, in Nova Scotia, the cooperatives pretty much cover everything. There is I made a small grocery list of a bunch of different cooperative operations. So we have anything from airports, like the one in Waterville, Cambridge, in mainland Nova Scotia. It's actually a co-op at the airport. And of course we have some of the normal ones you see everywhere else. We have water utilities, there are co-ops, and we have theatre productions. And one big thing in Nova Scotia is the investment funds, the community economic development investment funds. But it's just to give you an idea, plus fish plants and everything else. So it's a variety of sectors that the cooperatives operate in. Now this is the headcount approach in looking at the cooperative sector. So you can see this is on this particular screen you can see the breakdown that the Secretariat of the Cooperatives does in Nova Scotia. That's the breakdown that they have, which is basically 10 categories. And you can see we have 290 active co-ops, and they fall in those different categories, 733 million in revenue, 44,734 in members. You can see those numbers. And the number of employees. So those are the headcounts. You see the assets, the revenue, the number of members, the number of employees. And we also have the credit unions. So there's 31 credit union systems as such. There are over 80 branches. And as you can see, the number of members is much higher. And the number of assets is much higher. And so that's just a snapshot of what the sector looks like in Nova Scotia in 2011. So those numbers came from the Secretariat, the Nova Scotia as Fiona mentioned, we decided to use the Nova Scotia input-output basically model. And why we decided to do that is because basically that's how the province of Nova Scotia measures the impact of everything. So when they try to justify
920,000
in docks and infrastructure to justify to enable the big defense contract that the Irving shipyards got, you probably heard about that one. That was last year. The $35 billion project that's going to run over 30 years. And the province had to invest money in infrastructure. The way they try to justify that is by using the input-output model, basically, to figure out what the impact of that is. And when they also put a lot of money to the pulp mills, in Nova Scotia that were being put a lot of money into them, again, the input-output model was used to justify that investment. So this is pretty much the same method that our colleague Dr. Andre Leclerc used in New Brunswick to do the impact of the social economy in New Brunswick 3 years ago. So we use the same approach here. So we decided to go with the input-output model. It's something that's much more feasible because the Stats Canada has provincial multipliers for all these different industries, and we decided to go with the expanded Stats Canada breakdown. So we do one with a W breakdown, which is 301 industries. Now the same breakdown is also used by the Department of Finance for the province of Nova Scotia. The same breakdown, 301 industries. So this is much finer than going with the 10 categories that the Secretary uses here. So that gives you an idea. There you can see some of the categories. So basically we try to code every code in one of those 301 categories. So how do we measure this? By those are the things most people, besides the headcount, these are some of the things that people use for measuring economic impact. So what does the sector do in terms of the gross domestic product, the value added? What does the sector add to the value of the gross domestic product? And we're doing this again just for the province of Nova Scotia. And then what is the income in dollars, basically that goes to workers and households? That's the second one. And then the number of full-time jobs is the employment is the third one, and the fourth one is the tax revenue to all levels of government. So those are the four things that we try to measure. So in using the input-output model, the idea is that all sectors in the economy are interrelated. And again, this input-output model is the most popular one used by anywhere, and is introduced by Leon Dent, an American economist, a while back. And so the idea is that any time there's an activity that happens anywhere, then that generates payments that has an effect on other sectors of the economy. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Here in the province of Nova Scotia, one of the highest impact is the pulp mills have a tremendous impact. Like one pulp mill in Hawkesbury had a 2.2% GNP impact on the province of Nova Scotia, which is almost the same as this huge defense contract for building the boats. And why that is because the pulp mill uses a lot of local inputs. They use the trees that come from Nova Scotia. The people who work there, they're all from Nova Scotia. There's all the harvesters and all that. And that's basically the idea, that there was a lot of jobs impacted by one pulp mill. That's the idea with this, saying that all the sectors of the economy are interrelated. And so that's the idea with input-output. We're trying to look at the effect. So this ripple effect that goes throughout the economy is what we're trying to measure. And this is what we're trying to measure in this case for taking just the cooperative sector. So those are the three different ways we're going to do for those things. We're trying to figure out the value add on the GNP and all that. But we're doing it for every one of those. We're doing those three measures. We're trying to do the direct impact, which everybody understands that is the revenue that comes and the jobs and taxes that are generated directly by the sector. In this case, the co-ops. So those are the direct employment and taxes and sales. Then the indirect impact is the next thing that we have to calculate, and this is the the impact that comes from the businesses who supply the cooperatives. Right? So you can take the co-op and the grocery stores and the co-op and what they supply, and you can look at what the impact is going to be from basically from the suppliers and the producers, the farmers, the manufacturers that supply the co-ops. And the induced impact is a third thing, and this is the third ripple effect. And this is basically from everything that's totally indirect. So this is what happens from the employees of the co-ops, and the employees of their suppliers. And so there's, that's the employees and their families. That's the induced impact. And that can be fairly big in an economy like Nova Scotia. So those are the three things. And we're using the input-output model to quantify those linkages and those interactions. And the way basically it's done is by using economic multipliers. So the multipliers come from Stats Canada. They do this every 8 years or so. Stats Canada calculates their multipliers, and they're broken down as direct and indirect. And they also do them provincially, because every province has different kind of dynamics. But the multipliers provided by Stats Canada do not cover the induced impacts. Now, the Nova Scotia Department of Finance has a tweaked model, the NSIO model, the vector model they call it, and that makes allowances for induced impacts. Now, economists can also make some more broad assumptions on the induced impacts, but this is finer. And it is an issue with induced impacts here in a small economy like Nova Scotia, because the internal linkages are not as strong. In other words, we import a lot of stuff. We don't have a manufacturing sector that's developed as some other provinces are. So it's difficult to make assumptions about induced impacts. So it's better to do something that's customized for Nova Scotia. So this is why basically we decided to access the Department of Finance model, because that includes the induced impacts. So that model also uses the W level of Stats Canada, 301 sectors, to give us a finer estimate. So this is how we did the input. The input came from, we got the input from the Secretariat, from the Cooperative Branch of Service Nova Scotia. And we coded all the cooperatives. It turned out that we used 46 codes, so 46 of those 301. So this is how many subsectors the co-ops operating. And the ones that the co-ops that they were not part of the Cooperative Branch database, like the ones that get quoted outside, we tried to get that information, the sales information, and that was from Co-op Atlantic and Mountain Equipment Co-op. So that's what we did there for the sales data. And then we got the income data for the financial co-ops from the Atlantic Credit Union Central and from the cooperators that cover the credit unions and insurance. So that's where the data came from. And we coded everything, we did subtotals by code, and provided information to the Department of Finance. And basically we gave it the direct and the spin-off estimates for the GNP, for jobs, and for the employment income. So those three things we got out of them, but it did not do the taxes. That's one thing that the model did not give us. So I went back to use Stats Canada multipliers and data series on their household expenditures to figure out the taxes. So we have those estimates on the taxes, the production taxes, the product taxes, the household income taxes, and HST and the property taxes. Those are all the taxes basically involved in production and in reduced. So that's how we came around getting all these numbers. And this is a quick summary of everything. So looking at the first thing, we're looking at the GDP. You can see we did the breakdown by general co-ops and financial co-ops, those are the two. And you can see the direct effect and the spin-off effect. The spin-off including the indirect and induced. And there's the total. So you can see that the sector in total, the effect on the GDP is 700 and basically 800 million. That's what the effect is. On the jobs front, it's something like 11,359, which is significant. This will be roughly the number of all the federal jobs in Nova Scotia, federal government jobs in Nova Scotia. So it's kind of significant. Now, we did this in person years, full-time equivalent, by which basically shown that the part-time employment is half, 50% of the full-time employment. So this is how we figured that out. And then we did the household income, that's the third impact, and you can see that that's 469 million, that's what the total is. And then with the taxes, it takes all the work to figure out the taxes. So we use multipliers for the production taxes and the product taxes, which is basically the internal stuff that happens in the costs themselves. And then we did the household income taxes by using Stats Canada tables. And it turns out in Nova Scotia, the average family pays 15.6% in income tax. So that comes out to about 75 million for the year. And then we did the same thing for the HST, the sales tax. And it turns out the average Nova Scotia family spends 7.8% of their income in HST. And that comes into 36 million. And then we did the property taxes. And again, it turns out in Nova Scotia, 2.1% of the household income goes to property taxes. And that comes into close to $10 million for the employment, for the employment generated by the co-ops. So in total, there's 142 million is the taxes paid from the co-op sector to all levels of government. So that includes the federal income tax, the provincial, and the property taxes, which is local, municipal. So that's basically the effect of the total effect that we were able to calculate for the sector, and that pretty much captures everything. So that's a snapshot, and it looks fairly simple there, but it took a lot of work to get to that point. And if I look back at the challenges, the biggest challenges we had, it was basically the trying to get the data. That was the biggest challenge in trying to actually get the sales data for all the co-ops, the credit unions, and finance, the rest of the financial co-ops, the insurance, trying to get it all, and trying to get the sales for the outer province co-ops. That was even a bigger challenge. But that was trying to get the data is usually the problem, and that was the big problem in this one also. Yep. Okay, I think I covered everything.
Great, thank you very, very much, George. So what we'll do now, yeah, that was excellent. I think having Fiona sort of give us that overview of the different models that we could consider for this sort of national impact study project, and then having you give us the details on how one of those models could work, I think we really appreciate the complexities and what a large undertaking this is indeed. So what I'll do now is I will allow, if folks want to press star 2 to unmute their line, and if they would like to raise their hand, which can happen on the GoToWebinar menu, then what I'll have you do is we'll be able to start the discussion that way. So it's star 2 to unmute, and you can go ahead and raise your hand. There should be an option on your GoToWebinar menu, and then we can go ahead and hear from folks. Yeah. And I should mention, too, that this is Erin Hancock speaking. I realize I did a lot of talking at the beginning and never introduced myself, so there's a number of us in the CCA boardroom, Canadian Co-operative Association in Ottawa, that are all gathered around listening to all these details today. Yeah. Yeah. If there are folks on the line that have a question, if you can announce yourself, introduce your name and where you're calling from, and then ask your question to our speakers.
It's Michael Gertler in Saskatoon at the Center for the Study Cooperative.
Go ahead, Michael.
I wrote this question also, but it's a question that I've often wondered when I look at the use of input-output analyses to study the impact of co-op. Because it seems to me we end up measuring the cooperative difference, because we start by assuming the way that difference. We assume the possibility that there are differences in the multipliers in terms of local employment, in terms of backwards and forwards linkages, in terms of social multipliers as well as economic multipliers. some of which end up being economic multipliers. The type stability item is taken away. So to me, this is another economic tool which is in some ways difficult for co-ops to adopt because it takes away, it takes away all the differences before you start. And I wonder if somebody has an answer for me on that.
Well, this is George. Well, I fully understand all this, Michael, and I guess we're all trying to. This is what the whole project is all about. Is trying to figure out how we're going to tackle that to measure the difference. The way I try to do some of this in a roundabout way, because I mean we only have a short period of time to do this and all that. It's some of the things that really matter to Nova Scotia as far as the difference. You mentioned buying local and all that. That's one big thing, and that I wasn't able to measure because that requires going back to the corps to get them to fill in proper questionnaires for that, because that information is not available anywhere about what they buy from where they buy it. But one thing I try to do that matters a lot to Nova Scotia is Nova Scotia is a rural province. The size of the economy that's rural is really large. And of course, rural Nova Scotia doesn't have service jobs and doesn't have headquarters of anything. So I try to get a measure of how many co-ops are rural versus urban, how many are actually headquartered in rural Nova Scotia instead of urban. So that's one of the things I did, and I'm not sure that's like, but basically that slide shows that 60, more than half of the co-ops are rural. Like 136, just less than half are rural. But they have 76% of the sector membership, and 66% of the sector employment is rural in Nova Scotia. So the co-ops, like two-thirds almost of the co-op employment is, and the revenue is in rural Nova Scotia. So that's one measure. One other thing that, my colleague, Leslie Brown was doing the social impact, and one of the things she used also was the number of female board members and some other qualitative measures, and compare that to the corporate sector. That's that will be another thing that we try to do is an add-on. It's very difficult to measure. I totally agree that the core difference is difficult to measure, and something must be done on this, but that's one of the little things we did.
Because it's Michael again, I'll just say one comment. It's because it was mentioned at the beginning of our seminar that the stabilizing effect of the co-op in terms of the stability of the jobs and the stability of the enterprise can have multiplier effects in terms of the kinds of investments other people are able and willing to make, including public investments, but also various kinds of private and social economy investments. So I see what you're struggling with. I think we still have a tool which is biased against co-ops because it assumes the way much of the difference that we're interested in.
Thank you very much for your question, Michael, and George for your response. Do we have other folks that have questions for our presenters today, or comments on the models or ideas of other models that weren't mentioned today? Please announce yourself, your name, and your affiliation.
Well, my name is Tony Karaphillis, and I work at the Co-op Canada Accelerator. I have a sort of a basic problem understanding why it is, after more than 100 years of development, that we are so little ahead in terms of defining the cooperative difference. What has been the difficulty historically in getting this act together?
Fiona, did you want to start with that?
I think, thanks, Tony, for your question. By no means do I have all the answers, and I'm absolutely positive that many people on the line would also be able to fill in these gaps. But some of the challenges that I highlighted earlier, co-ops not being just in the economic realm, but also being in the social and, leaning in the environmental realm. And so and Michael's question highlights exactly that. How do we capture some of these things when some of the tools haven't been created? So this is sort of our intention here, is to, maybe we need to Frankenstein together some methods so that we can come up with something that is valid and legitimate and can easily be, because that's the other thing, is we want to be able to compare ourselves as well to other sectors, other types of organizational structures, Canadian economy, what we do for it. And so we do need to play their game, but at the same time we also need to make sure that we capture and reflect what we do. I don't have a more detailed answer than that. And others, please step in.
I understand that that's what the objective is. My question is, why are we sort of getting into it as if this is something that's just occurred to us? Is this the first attempt that's been made to bring together some kind of measurement of economic, social, and environmental impact?
This is George. I wish I could answer that. I think that's been going for a while, but my own understanding of the cooperative movement is that initially, it really became strong after the 30s, and initially the big emphasis was in trying to create co-ops. Like most of the effort from the movement here in Nova Scotia wanted to create co-ops without seeing the need, trying to explain the difference, because things were so bad here for people, and that's what the emphasis was. I think it's now in the last 15, 20 years that because there is a movement also on the corporate world to explain the investment community. So now it's becoming more obvious that we have to measure this. I don't think the pressure was there 50 years ago. This is my own take, that this is the pressure to measure everything now is much higher in the last 10 years or so.
Thank you very much.
Corporations now, when they put their annual reports out, they have to explain on the triple bottom line. In some of the conferences, people were challenging, some academics were challenging us. But, why do we think the co-ops are making such a big difference? That everybody's trying to do CSR, corporate social responsibility. So it's becoming more of an issue now. I think that's why it's a good question. How come it took so many years? Well, I think the pressure is on now.
Thank you very much, George.
We had the pressure before.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Tony, for your question. I think also there's sort of this anecdotal, over the years in bits and pieces we've certainly collected this, and it's a matter of doing something fairly grand, of pulling together a lot of these different indicators. I think there's been lots of attempts and lots of successes, just not necessarily across the whole country before. Okay, we've got 4 people that have questions, so we're going to move along. So Lynn, if you want to unmute your line, press star to unmute your line, introduce yourself, and we'll take your question.
Hi, thank you. This is Lynn Pittman with the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives, and all of this seems very familiar, both the challenges and the opportunities here. I'm currently coordinating something that's very similar to what George has finished here for our state of Wisconsin. And I think, the goal is, first of all, to just remind people about the size of the cooperative sector here in the state, and while some of the measurements actually don't go directly to the cooperative difference, it does remind people that cooperatives are present here in the state, so it will have some effect that way. George, I specifically was wondering how, if you tried to measure the patronage refund function of co-ops in your
Yeah, that came up, and when we're trying to do this, I tried to do that actually, because we had this figure from the Credit Union Central gave us that figure. We didn't have it from everybody else, but it was from the Credit Union Central reported that figure. But the model I was using, I could not use that. The input output multipliers I had, there's no way I could have introduced that because we already accounted them basically in the terms of the multipliers are based on the whole economy. So they included things like dividends and that kind of stuff. Now the patronage and the refunds is much higher than dividends, but within that system, my multipliers in the model in Nova Scotia, but the Department of Finance did not differentiate. But we I definitely saw that, and but I couldn't account for it.
And we ran into that problem also.
I know.
Thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you. That was a good question.
Next we've got Kevin Morris. Kevin, if you want to start by introducing yourself.
Hi, this is Kevin from the University of Manitoba. There's two questions somewhat related. How hard was it to get, you said that it was hard, this is for George, how hard was it to get the data, or like, why was it hard to get the data from what was the resistance?
Okay, yeah, if you remember the first slide I had, I showed how the branch, the cooperative branch in Nova Scotia, not all provinces apparently have a cooperative branch, but anyway, we have a cooperative branch, and they have an annual return that comes from all the cooperatives. They all do an annual return that shows their income and all kind of stuff, and the financial statements. Now, those are not, they're private, so to speak. We're not able to access those. And then the way they break up the cooperatives, if you notice, was 10 categories. And they have like only one category for all the worker corps. And the worker corps are into a bunch of different sectors. So you cannot use like one multiplier for all the worker corps. So I couldn't use the numbers the way they were given to us. So we had to somehow access and break down the sales, the revenue for the corps by sector by using those 301 categories. And then that was not available. So the only solution I had to that one, we agreed that I will go ahead and download the list of the corps that they had on the website and call those corps, give the Staff Canada code on it, on every one of them. Then I provided that spreadsheet to the branch, and I asked them to give me basically to put the figures in and give me a subtotal by sector because they could not give any individual co-op information. So they agreed after, 3 meetings and stuff, where they agreed that they would do that. And that basically that process alone took about 3 months before we managed to get the agreement to get it done that way. And then I managed to get the subtotals late because it takes time for them to do it too. So, we had the same situation with the central, the credit union central was much easier there because the numbers were only one sector. You don't have to worry about different codes. There's only one code for the credit unions, and so it was much easier that way.
So George, this is Fiona. This is dealing with confidentiality of data. Is that part of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's the biggest issue. And some of the things like, the patronage and all that, the patronage funds are not clearly identified, and they don't have to report those on their returns clearly. So some of the items are not easy to get.
Thanks very much, George. Oh, sorry, Kevin.
The second question?
Well, can we come back to you in just a moment, unless it's a direct follow-up?
That's fine.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Bonnie, you have a question? Please start by introducing yourself. And press star 2 to unmute your line.
Yes, this is Bonnie Outsteps. I work with the Neighboring Food Co-op Association in northeast New England. And one of the things that we're really struggling with is how to measure economic impact when we work with an association of food co-ops specifically. And they have such a variance in the range of systems they have for measuring their basic data. Beyond trying to find money to help them upgrade their POS systems for measuring sort of more of the social and environmental data, I was wondering if you have any experience or ideas about how can we address this so we can better gather and collect the data.
I see. Well, the this is George again, the way the input-output model works, it only requires, this is why it's so popular, it only requires just a couple of inputs, sales basically, revenue being the biggest one. So as far as doing economic impact, that's all it requires. And of course, if we're going to find in a way that perhaps the pattern actually, the refund, the rebate kind of data will be important. But that's as far as the input-output model goes. That's all it requires. So, but trying to do the other, trying to do the social impact and environmental impact, of course, it requires a lot of numbers, and this is where we have the difficulty collecting them.
This is Fiona.
So they give us,
This is Fiona. One idea that we've come up with here that has not been implemented but has just been sort of bandied about is to come up with something like maybe 10 social indicators to try to address the social impact. Come up with 10 social indicators that all co-ops would buy into, like so through some consultation processes and so the co-ops can see themselves in those indicators, and they would be willing to also work to collect that. And then there was a central a place, perhaps online, I don't know, that people annually would fill in. But it wasn't so onerous because there's tons and tons of different types of tools out there, guidelines, frameworks to measure different types of indicators, social and environmental. But maybe we need to help co-ops by whittling that down so it's much more manageable, especially for the smaller co-ops. And with a bit of support, some buy-in, centralized, and then we can start to pump out and do some evaluative work from it. Just an idea at this moment.
And another thing I wanted to mention, Bonnie, this is Erin Hancock here. If you want to connect with a co-op out of the States called Co-op Metrics, it's not necessarily social indicators that they're capturing, but they're starting to do a bit more of that. But they capture business analytics for food co-ops and allow you to compare your business performance to other co-ops of a similar shape and size. And so that might be one. We've actually did a webinar with them earlier, I believe it was last year, and so on our website you can get the video from that and learn a bit more about how they collect their metrics. So thanks very much. I realize that we're at 1:30 now, we're at our hour, and so what I'll do is give folks an opportunity to leave if you've only set aside an hour for this, but otherwise folks can stay on the line. We've got a couple more people with questions, and so we'll extend the webinar for another 10 minutes if you have questions that you want to ask or you want to stay for the discussion. So I'll thank everyone for joining us today. Again, we have a webinar again on April 25th, and so we'll hope that you register and can join us for that as well. Thanks very much, and stay tuned for upcoming events, news, and research results.
Thank you.
Okay, so now that folks have left, we'll go over to Luke Terrio. Luke, did you want to ask your question? You can press *2 to unmute your line. Okay, Luke, we'll come back to you. We'll go back to Kevin. Go ahead, Kevin, with your second question.
Hey, okay, so this is close to George, but is there any other externalities measuring that you guys looked at to what might have been more helpful or less helpful? I'm thinking like there's got to be something like out of Europe or something that they're doing to measure negative externalities, and I'm wondering if that can be used for positive externalities.
Oh, I honestly did not probe that. That far. It was just some of the few things that came to mind that were the positive externalities were the fact that they buy a lot of local. They support co-ops typically buy a lot of local stuff, and more so than the corporate entities do, because basically the headquarters are local, and that's typically how it works. And So that's what this is some of the stuff that we're looking at. And again, the rural urban, we didn't prop for any other major externalities. Again, we tried to do this project within 6 months. I was part of it. You know, I started the project in June, and we had the conference in November. So yeah, the big thing was trying to get economic impact. And by using the same kind of methods that the province of Nova Scotia uses for measuring the economic impact of other sectors and other initiatives, so that we were comparable. That was the number one factor for this particular. That was the number one criteria for this particular project. We're trying to be comparable with everything else the province was looking at.
Thanks for your question, Kevin. Justin Ellerby, if you want to start, Justin, by introducing yourself.
Hi there, my name is Justin Ellerby. I am a student under the George's program, where I was referred by Lynn Tibbins, so thanks Lynn again. I guess I was wondering, since George, you showed the methodology that's partly based on comparability, but I wonder how that comparability is going to play out, how the metrics will be used by, I don't know, say policymakers or anyone else. If they see a very strong and robust co-op economy, does that advocate for folks to invest less in it? If they see a relatively smaller co-op economy than they were expecting, does that induce them to want to abandon it? What are we anticipating?
Well, actually, this is a very good question, Justin, because that was the whole point of the whole conference, I believe. And policymakers were there at the conference and all that. And it has already been in play. The Cooperative Council, the Nova Scotia Cooperative Council, already started running ads on TV ads about the impact of the cooperative sector in Nova Scotia, and it uses some of the figures that we provided. So they already started doing this. And they're basically trying to get the attention of the policymakers that they have to start doing something for the co-op sector. That is a little bit different than the way it operates and the way it helps the local economies and it helps rural Nova Scotia. So this is so they already started using this. Primarily the Nova Scotia Cooperative Council is the champion of doing that. So that's already in place, so to speak. Because those numbers were significant. Like I said, the employment figures are very comparable to the employment of the federal government sector in Nova Scotia. So that kind of caught people's eye in that it is significant. It's 2.2% of the GNP for Nova Scotia, the co-op sector is, but it's 2.5% of the employment in Nova Scotia. And it's very comparable to the provincial government employment and to the federal government employment.
Thanks.
So that was basically the purpose, in trying to basically tell the public policy people that it's not a thing of the past. It's not the glorious past. The cooperative sector could be a tool to be used for the future.
Thank you very much, Georgia. And
if there's an opportunity later to clarify that question, I would take that opportunity.
okay, let's try, just one second, Justin. Let's just try. We have time for one more question, I think. Okay, Justin, go right ahead. Let's keep it quick, but go for it.
Okay. All that's understood, George, but at the same time, like I was trying to describe earlier, you can use a policymaker that doesn't care about cooperatives can look at the strength that your report has demonstrated and say, oh, well, obviously they're doing fine their own, they don't need support. So how are you guys framing this, or how are you hoping to frame it in such a way that it'll say, no, we do need more support?
Well, I think this is what the Nova Scotia Cooperative Council has done with the young children. I think they've done this, they already have done this, so to speak. I don't know, they're in the process of using it. I don't know exactly, but there's some support that they're looking for, and because the province places most of their attention to the corporate sector, and they're basically trying to say, well, there is another sector that works better for local economies, and this is the approach it's using. Usually governments like to support things that are growing and not things that are shrinking. That's usually what they do. And so actually showing that we are healthy, that kind of helps. But of course everything is changing, like the Farmers Dairy, which is like the second biggest cooperative in Nova Scotia, is merging with Agripur, right? So that's going to become another huge co-op. That the province is going to control from outside the province. So everything is changing, but that also indicates that, that there is health there. And that's why they're merging and all that.
Actually, that addresses a question methodologically on how do you then handle that? Your Agripur.
Yeah, and that's why Andre suggested that we look at doing a national impact analysis and with some drill down capability to provinces, but it's very difficult to do this, yes. Yes, because, the headquarters, the jobs in the headquarters typically have a bigger spin-off than jobs in other parts of the empire, so to speak. So that's why it's nice to have a lot of co-ops headquartered in your own community.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. Luke, I see that you're still there. If you want to press *2 to unmute, we'll let you ask one of your questions before we close.
No, I'm okay. I didn't have any specific question. I made some comments on the blurb thing, and I like that, but I can give a chance to someone else.
Do you have any final questions from anyone before we close the webinar today?
Just one comment I will make is, George, about some of the questions that came on the co-op difference and how we're going to measure that. Let Nicolette try to handle this in her paper. I think she did a very good job. Methodological challenges in measuring the impact and how we can go around that. So if anybody's really interested in that, I believe once they look at Nicolette's paper, pages 7 to 10, it's about 4 pages that she spent explaining that. So that will be good information.
Yeah, we're hoping to move Nicoletta's paper towards publishing, but if anybody wants to see a draft version, either for comment or for their own ideas, then just contact me, Fiona, and we can talk about that. Thank you, everyone, for your suggestions and ideas, and for participating online today.
Yes, absolutely. And we will make sure that the PowerPoints that we presented today will be available on the website by tomorrow. So we'll send a follow-up message from GoToWebinar linking you to that. And there'll be a brief survey as well, so you can let us know if you have any ideas for future webinars or any feedback on how things went today. And do stay in touch, and hopefully you can join us when we have our next webinar on the 25th. Thank you. Thanks to our speakers.
Thank you.